Hello everyone and welcome to Evan Codes. This is episode 4 in Learning Python, and today we're excitingly learning our first game in Python. So this is a very simple tic-tac-toe game that we're going to be running just in the console of our unit here, and we're going to be going over things like creating our main function, creating a game loop to run the program, checking for winners, checking if there's no winners. So let's get right into it. Okay, so let's get started. We are using Google Colabs here, so if you aren't familiar with this platform, just check out the first few videos in this series and they'll help you get started setting up. To begin, let's just make a list of our functional requirements for this program. So it's just going to be a simple 3x3 tic-tac-toe board, human versus computer, and for simplicity's sake, we will say that the computer will just play randomly. We will say human player will start, and to win game 3 in a row, either horizontal, vertical, or diagonal. And if there is no winner after 9 moves, so the entire board being filled, we need to end the game. To start, we're going to be defining a main function for this program. So to do that in Python, we just need to start def main, simply like that. Anything indented inside of this function will be included in the main function. One more thing to complete if we're using a main function is to go to the very bottom of our code and tell the program that we have indeed a main function and that it's not just a script. So if and we say underscore underscore name underscore underscore equals underscore underscore main, then go to main. First thing that we want to do in the main function is initialize the board. So we know it's going to be a 3x3 matrix. You could either do a 2-dimensional array of 3x3, so something like 3 and 3. For simplicity, I'm just going to do a single array with 9 items in it. So to do that, I'm going to define a variable named board, and it's going to equal to an empty array. And to initialize that, I'm just going to put a empty space character in there just to load the array with something. And we're going to times that by 9. So that should create our empty board array with 9 items in it. So just to test that everything's working, we'll just start using some print statements throughout this. So we're just going to print our board here when we run our main program, and you can see we have an empty array with 9 spots in it. So now we can display the empty board to the user. So all we have right now is an empty array. So let's create a new function that's going to display the board, and we can call this function after every turn or every round of turns. So let's call it display board, and we're going to pass it a variable of board. So we're passing the array of board into this display board function. We'll create that function up here, and we'll just call the variable inside the function board as well. We're essentially just going to print into the console the board configuration. So with a little bit of formatting, you can run these print statements. So we're just going to run a space followed by the first item of the board variable, a line, the second item of the board list, another line, the third item, and so on and so forth. So if we run this, you can see we have an empty tic-tac-toe board here. The next step we are going to take is to make essentially a game loop inside of the main function. So to do this, you want to usually run a infinite loop. So you would normally say while true, and this would run until there's some sort of end statement. But what we'll do for simplicity here is just create a flag, call that the end game flag, and we'll set it to false to start with. And we can say here, while the end game flag does not equal true, so while the end game is false, run everything in the loop. Pull our function for this up here, and this will essentially spam our board a bunch of times if we don't tell it to stop. So we can say end game equals true. And that should only allow the loop to complete once, and we will end the game. So let's test. There we go. So we have the same output as before, but now we have this loop to work with, so we can do multiple iterations. The next thing we want to do is make the first turn. So let's create a new function called player turn, because we said the human will go first, so we'll call player turn first. And let's send it our board. And then up here, we can create that function. So define player turn with board in it. And inside of the player turn, we are going to want to set a player flag. And while, make a loop in here. So while the player flag is true, we can get input from the user to take a number. So what this player flag is going to do is going to check the input from the user has not already been played. So we'll call it a turn check flag or something like that. So here we're going to get input from user, and to do that we can make a variable called turn, and it will equal input of, and this will be the prompt to the user, so enter turn location, we can say, and we'll give it a little hint. We'll say 1 to 9. And we know this is going to be a number, so let's make sure we put an int in front of it to convert the user string into an integer. Next, we need to check if valid turn. So we can say if board of the location we just got, so turn and -1, because turn is going to get 1 through 9, but our array actually goes from 0 to 8. The index is 1 less. If the location specified by the user is valid, so to check if it's valid, we remember we created an empty list here, so we can check if it is not equal to an empty character. So we're going to want to check if the turn that the user just entered does not equal a space. So if there is a number already there, we want to mark our player flag as true, which means the loop will continue to operate. It'll ask the user again for another input location, and we can just print something to the user to say, hey, bad input. So bad input, please try another location. And if the user makes it past this check here, so if they've entered a valid turn, we can say player flag equals false. So that'll not execute the next loop. And then let's just display our board using the display board function. And then let's add our turn to the board. So we can say board of turn -1 equals X. We'll say the humans are X. Then we can display the board to the user after the first turn. And then to finish out this loop here, we're going to want to return board. And just a little bit of formatting here. These last 3 items are going to be outside of the while loop. Okay, so I've made one change here. So let's reiterate, run through this function again. So we're going to start by initializing a flag for true. We're going to create a while loop while that variable is true. We're going to get input from the user and assume that is good input, so we'll call the flag false, which will mean we'll exit out of this loop. However, we're going to perform a check before we leave the loop, and if the turn is invalid, we'll change that flag back to true, so it will not exit the loop. If it is valid, the flag will remain false, and we will leave the loop. And then we can add that valid turn to the board, and then display the board and return the board. Now back in our main function, we've called player turn, but if you recall, player turn is returning the board. So what we want to do here is essentially re-update the board with this returned board. So board equals this. For the player turn, we're going to send it the current board, get the input from the player, and return the board and reassign it to the board variable, essentially overwriting the new board. So let's try run this, see if we have any errors. We see our empty board here first, and enter location 1 through 9. So if we do location 1, enter, you can see we have an X in the first location. Okay, so a couple things we want to do here before we move on is create a turn counting variable and set it to 0 in our main loop, so under the initialization area here. And then in the game loop, after the player's turn, we can say turn count, add 1 to it. So turn count plus, and then we can do an end game check. Here the game will end with the end game variable being set to true after 1 turn. So let's get rid of this and let's create a function here to check for a winner or the end of the game, which would be after 9 moves without a winner. So we can say check winner, let's call it, and let's give it a board and specify what turn was just played, because then we only have to check if X won or if O won. So X just went, so the player just went. We can send a string of X and the board to this function. So up here, let's create the function. So check winner, and again, we will get our board into the function, and we'll call the string that we sent, the X or the O, player. There are a lot of different ways to complete this check. There's some actually very interesting optimization that we can do for this, but to keep things simple for now, we are just going to use simple if-else statements. So we're going to start by saying if, and this would be the top line we're checking for. So board 0, the board position, first position. So this if statement checks board position 1, 2, and 3 and combines them all together to only compute if all 3 of them are an X, for example, or all 3 of them are an O. So from here, if that is the case, we can print player, which would be X in the first case here. And print that X has won the game. Then let's return true back to our variable, and then we can say else. So if the check did not complete for a winner, we can return false. So before we go any further, let's test this. We can look down here, and the end game variable will be changed to true if the first row is completed, and if not, then it will just keep playing. So if we run this, we're asked for our prompt again. So position 1, we can see there's an X. Position 2, there's another X. And let's try position 4. You can see that it didn't complete the row. So let's try position 3. And it should end the game with a prompt that X is the winner. Look at that. To ensure that it's not been the 9th turn before the computer player goes. So if the game hasn't ended, and turn count does not equal 9, so if it's not already the 9th turn, then let's do the same thing as we did up here. Add the computer turn to the board, but let's call this computer turn instead of player turn. And let's create a new function. So up here, let's define our computer turn. And what the computer turn is going to do is essentially the same as the player turn, but it's going to get a random integer and check if that random integer is valid first. So let's capture everything from this player turn and make some changes. So we'll set this computer flag to true, start a loop, and our turn this time is going to look for a random number. So random dot rand int from 0 to 8 for our random number. Okay, so here we have our refactored computer turn function. It's a little bit smaller than the player turn. We got rid of a couple things, so let's run through quick. We start with our flag. We enter into a while loop while that flag is true and try to get a random integer from 0 to 8. If that spot in the board list is empty, then we can change the flag to false and exit out of the loop. Add an O to that position on the board, display the board to the user, and return the board back to the main function. Increment the turn counter. And do our endgame check. But this time, we're going to check for O instead of X. And now let's do the 9 turn check. So right now it would just keep prompting the user for another turn. If there was no winner by the 9th turn and the game would not end, we can try and end the game here. So we say if turn count equals 9 and game is false. So if we are still running through the loop, then we're going to print no winner, and we'll set end game to true to conclude the loop. That will not allow the loop to run again. So let's check before. So we have an error, and this is missing a colon for the if statement. Run again, check again, and everything should work good this time. Perfect, and X is the winner. Okay, and the last thing we need to do is complete the rest of the winner checks here. So right now we're only checking for the top row. So we need to check for all the other rows first before we return false. So I've just prepared this. So this one is checking the first line, second line, third line, first row, second row, third row, and then one diagonal, and then the other diagonal. So now let's run our game and see if we have a working game. Let's see if we can let the computer win. And it doesn't want to win, so we'll say location 4 and no winner. Check again, make sure that the computer can win. There we go. The computer has won a game, we have won a game, and we've completed with no game. So this is our first full program into one function here. So we've started out by creating the main function and a bunch of other functions that do small chunks of code throughout the rest of the program. First, we'll go into this game loop, then display our board to the user, get our player turn, get our computer turn, and check for a winner after each turn, and then check if we've either won the game or there has been no winner after the end of 9 turns. So this is a fairly simple game. The user interface could definitely use some work, and probably in the future we might look at creating an actual nice user interface, but this is just functionality wise how you can create your first game in Python. And if you've enjoyed this, please consider liking and subscribing, as it'll help the channel grow as we look to do some more cool and innovative things with Python in the future. And if you struggled with any part of this, please check out any of the previous videos, and they might help your understanding of some data structures and functions and other things like that. And again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.